My name is Rachel Carter, and I never imagined that one Christmas dinner could redefine everything I thought I knew about my family. Let me take you back to that night, a night that began like any other holiday gathering, yet carried a tension so sharp it felt almost visible in the air. The table glowed under the chandelier, the same mahogany surface where I had sat for over 3 decades, watching my father slice turkey with the authority of a king. But this time, something was different. His eyes lingered too long on each of us, and even my mother, always composed, nervously twisted the pearls at her neck. The clinking of silverware and the murmur of small talk could not mask the heaviness that hung over us. I could taste it in the mashed potatoes, I could feel it in the silence between my brother's glances. My phone buzzed inside my purse. I ignored it. Whatever my assistant wanted could wait. Because in this house during holiday dinners, nothing came before my father's voice. And then it began. He set down the carving knife with a theatrical pause, clearing his throat like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. The fire cracked faintly in the adjoining room, almost as if it were leaning in to listen. Every eye turned toward him, waiting for his words, sensing that whatever he was about to say would change the room. I adjusted the sleeve of my black sweater, steadying myself. I had learned over years of dinners like this that my father rarely spoke without intention. I glanced at my brothers Matthew and Daniel. Their wives leaned in eagerly, their children half listening, and my mother gave me that look she always did, before a momentous announcement, half expectation, half warning. This was not just a dinner, this was theater, and my father, as always, was the star. "Rachel," he began, and the way he said my name made the room fall silent. His voice carried the weight of finality, the same tone he used when closing business deals or declaring family decisions. For a brief second, my heart raced, but not from fear, from recognition. I knew that whatever came next, I had to remain calm. I had to sit still even when every instinct told me to brace for impact. The truth is, this family had always seen me as the outlier, the quiet one, with the little computer job, the daughter who never quite fit the mold of business empires and big gestures. They measured success in contracts and construction projects, in deals signed over glasses of wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent. I measured mine in silence, away from their gaze, in worlds they didn't even bother to imagine. That night, though, I felt something stirring, a strange electricity beneath my skin. Maybe it was the anticipation of being judged yet again. Maybe it was the knowledge of the secret I had carried for years, a truth so vast it could shatter the illusion they had built about me. But I stayed still. I smiled faintly. I took another bite, and I prepared myself for what was about to unfold. Because this wasn't just another family dinner. This was the night my father would declare I wasn't worthy of his empire. And this was the night he would learn just how wrong he had been. Before I take you further, let me ask you this. Have you ever been underestimated, dismissed, or labeled as the weak link in your own family? If you know that feeling, share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to follow more stories where hidden truths turn the world upside down. That was the opening act of my Christmas story. What followed would leave the entire table stunned into silence and change my family forever. My father leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room like a general before issuing orders. His hand rested on his wine glass, the stem trembling almost imperceptibly. Then he spoke. "I have been working with the estate attorney," he said, his voice low but commanding. "It is time to finalize the future of this family. The businesses, the properties, the investments. I have made my decision." The clinking of forks against porcelain stopped. The laughter of a moment earlier vanished. My brothers straightened, ready to receive their crowns. Their wives leaned forward, eyes gleaming with anticipation. Even the nephews stopped scrolling their phones, sensing something monumental was about to be revealed. And then the verdict came. Matthew and Daniel will inherit everything. They have proven themselves capable of carrying this legacy. The construction company, the restaurants, the real estate ventures, all of it. As for Rachel... He paused, his gaze settling on me as though I were a puzzle he had never solved. "You will receive a small trust fund, $50,000, enough to keep you comfortable. For a heartbeat, the words did not register. 50,000. To them, it was a kindness, a gesture. To me, it was the price they put on my worth. My mother rushed to fill the silence, her pearls catching the light as her hand fluttered to her throat. Sweetheart, it is not that we do not love you. It is just that you have always been different. You never cared for real business. Your little computer work, your apartment downtown. You are not like your brothers. Her tone was almost gentle, as if she were excusing a child who had never quite learned to walk straight. Matthew adjusted his tie and leaned forward. Dad is right. The construction company requires someone who understands negotiations, contracts development. I have been working with him for years. I know how to handle it. Daniel draped an arm across his wife's chair, his smile smug. And the restaurants need leadership. Staff vendors, multiple locations. Rachel, you would be out of your depth. But we can expand scale, build something lasting. Their words circled the table like knives cutting deeper with every turn. They believed I was incapable, that I was fragile, that my world began and ended with lines of code typed in the glow of a small laptop. I lifted my glass of wine, swirling the Bordeaux as though their words had not pierced me. They did not know I was the one who had added this very bottle to their cellar. They did not know how many of their assumptions were about to unravel, but still I smiled. You are absolutely right, I said softly. I would not know the first thing about running a construction company or managing restaurants. For the first time that night, my father's expression softened. He exhaled, relieved that I had not protested, relieved that the daughter who had always been different seemed to understand her place. I am glad you see it clearly, he said, raising his glass. This does not mean we do not value you. We just know where the responsibilities belong. Matthew, Daniel, you will carry this legacy forward. The glasses rose around the table. Crystal chimed together in a toast to the Empire's new heirs. I raised mine half-heartedly, murmuring to family. But inside I felt the familiar sting. This was not new. This was the same story I had heard my entire life. My brothers were visionaries, leaders, the rightful heirs. I was the quiet one with a hobby. They thought I lived in a cramped apartment because I could not afford better. They thought I had no interest in real business because I never sat at their tables boasting about deals. They never asked. They never looked closer. As the toast ended, Daniel leaned back smirking. Maybe this will push you to think about your future, Rachel. A woman your age should not be living alone, working all hours on computers. Perhaps you will find a husband now. My mother scolded him gently, though the smile tugging at her lips betrayed she agreed. And I smiled again, cutting another piece of turkey as though the words meant nothing. You are right, I said. I should think about my future more seriously. What they did not know was that my future had already been written. It just did not include them. Before I continue, let me pause to ask you something. Have you ever been told you were not good enough by the very people who should have believed in you the most? If that has happened to you, share your story in the comments below. Your words matter. And if you want to hear how this story turns everything upside down, make sure you subscribe now so you do not miss the next part. That night I sat quietly as my family celebrated a decision that erased me from their empire. What they did not realize was that empires can crumble in silence and be rebuilt by those they underestimate most. The clinking of cutlery returned softer now, but the air at the table had changed. They had made their judgment, and I had nodded along. My brothers wore their triumph like crowns. Their wives leaned closer already, whispering about plans for new ventures they would soon control. Matthew dabbed at his mouth with a linen napkin. You know, Rachel, he said, his tone that of a teacher addressing a slow student business is not just about numbers on a screen. It is about presence, negotiating, building real things you can touch. You have never shown much interest in that world. Daniel chuckled, leaning back, his arms still draped lazily across his wife's chair. Exactly. You hide in front of a computer. You would never survive in the chaos of restaurants or construction sites. Those are real challenges. Their wives, eager to join the chorus, added their own notes. Matthew has been working with your father for years, Caroline said with pride, her voice swelling as if she were announcing royalty. He has the discipline to lead. And Daniel knows how to manage people, Laura added, nodding toward her husband. He can handle pressure employees' negotiations. It is not really your skill set, Rachel. The words landed one after another like stones in my lap. Heavy, predictable. They believed they were being kind, offering explanations for why I had been excluded. But what they were really doing was confirming what they had always thought, that I was less, that I was small. I took another sip of wine, savoring its richness. They had no idea I was the one who had stocked this vintage. They had no idea how many times they had walked through buildings I had financed, how many deals I had closed quietly in the background while they boasted at this table. But still I let them talk. I let them weave their tapestry of superiority. Because silence in moments like these is not weakness, it is strategy. My mother's voice broke into the conversation, gentle yet cutting. Rachel, honey, we just want what is best for you. We know you live in that little downtown apartment. It must be hard at your age being alone, working such long hours. We worry. I turned my head, smiling faintly. Thank you, Mom. I appreciate your concern. She patted my hand, satisfied, as though she had offered comfort. But in truth, she had just placed another brick on the wall that separated us. Daniel leaned forward again, his smirk widening. Maybe now you will finally listen. You have coasted long enough, Rachel. $50,000 will give you breathing room. But it is time you faced reality. Find a husband. Find a real job. Build a life worth something. The words stung, not because I believed them, but because they revealed how little he understood. To them, success was always measured by external signs, luxury cars, sprawling homes, public recognition. They had never considered that true success might look different. And so I smiled again. I cut another piece of turkey, steadying my breath. You may be right, Daniel. Perhaps it is time I thought more seriously about my future. The table erupted in approving nods, satisfied smiles. They believed I had accepted my place, that I was conceding. Inside, I felt something else entirely. A fire. A quiet, steady burn that had been building for years. Let me pause here to ask you something. Have you ever sat at a table where every word spoken about you was meant to shrink you, to remind you of your supposed limits? What did you do in that moment? Did you fight back, or did you wait? Share it below. I want to know how you handled it. 'Cause I chose to wait. I chose to let them believe. And as they patted themselves on the back, convinced they had put me in my place, I sat quietly, knowing that the ground beneath their confidence was about to shift. They thought I was invisible. They thought I was powerless. But soon, very soon, they would learn that the quietest one at the table can carry the loudest truth. That night, every word they spoke tightened the rope of arrogance around their necks. They just did not realize who was holding the end of it. I cut another bite of turkey, slowly, deliberately, letting the blade of my fork glide through the meat as though nothing around me mattered. In truth, everything mattered. Every smirk, every word of condescension, every nod of agreement was etching itself into the air like smoke that would not fade. My brothers carried on, emboldened by my quiet acceptance. Matthew spoke of expansion plans, about purchasing a new block of luxury condos downtown. Daniel leaned in, describing his vision for the restaurants, how he would streamline management and triple the profits. Their wives chimed in with dreams of galas and charity luncheons, where they would bask in reflected glory. I sipped the wine again, letting it linger on my tongue. This Bordeaux had cost more than most people's rent, but they thought it was my father's indulgence, another symbol of his cultivated taste. They did not know it was mine. They did not know I had quietly placed it in the cellar. Last month, one small gift from a fortune they had never bothered to see. Rachel, my mother said gently, trying once more to soften the blow. It is not about worthiness. You have always been different. You love your computers. You love your little life in that apartment. That is who you are, and that is fine. But it is not business. I smiled faintly. The words should have hurt. Years ago, they would have carved deep. But tonight, they were almost amusing. To them, my life was little. My work was small. And because I had chosen not to flaunt wealth or status, they had written me into the role of the family disappointment. I kept my silence, but silence is never empty. It is a stage. My phone buzzed again in my purse. I could see the screen light up with Emma's name. She never called during dinner unless it was urgent. The merger, perhaps, or the acquisition. $2.3 billion could wait. Because this moment, the theater unfolding at this mahogany table, was too perfect. Daniel leaned back, smiling at me as if he had solved my life. Maybe this will push you, Rachel. You are almost 33. Time to settle. Get married. Stop playing with computers. Build something real. I raised my glass once more. You are right, I said quietly. I should think more about my future. Their satisfaction was immediate. Nods, approving smiles, even a pat on my hand from my mother, as though I were a child who had finally admitted a mistake. Inside, I felt the steady rhythm of something they could not hear. The hum of engines they did not know existed, engines I had built and nurtured until they roared. They thought my future began at this table. But I knew the truth: my future had been built long before tonight. And soon their carefully crafted illusions would collapse beneath the weight of a reality they had never dared to imagine. So, before I continue, let me ask you something directly. Have you ever kept a secret so enormous that revealing it would flip everything upside down: your family, your friends, your place in the world? Would you keep it longer, or would you let it out when the time was right? Leave your answer below. I want to know if you too have carried that kind of power in silence. As they basked in their imagined triumph, I sat in the middle of their empire, cloaked in invisibility, holding truths they could not fathom. The table gleamed with silver and crystal, the fire crackled in the next room, and every word spoken was another brick in the fortress of their arrogance. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was finished. But the night was still young, and soon, very soon, the fortress would fall. The conversation turned louder, almost triumphant, as though my brothers had already stepped into the role of kings. Matthew leaned forward, excitement flashing across his face. Dad, Daniel, listen. This is the perfect moment to expand. There's a new development downtown, Harborview Residences. Luxury condos, glass walls overlooking the harbor. It's a gold mine. We could buy in early and double our returns within a year. Daniel nodded eagerly. I've seen the plans. High demand, limited supply. It's the type of project that cements a legacy. We could carry the Thompson name into the city skyline itself. Their wives practically glowed with pride. Caroline touched Matthew's arm, whispering, Imagine the parties, the prestige. Everyone will know you as the family who owns Harborview. Laura leaned closer to Daniel, her eyes glittering. It's more than business, it's power. Control over the city's future. I nearly choked on my wine, forcing myself to cover the sudden laugh that wanted to escape. Harborview Residences, the very project I had financed. The very building that had generated more than $30 million in profit just last quarter. I set my glass down carefully, keeping my expression calm. That sounds like a wonderful investment, I said, my voice steady, my fork slicing gently through the turkey. For a heartbeat, my nephew James glanced up from his phone, his brow furrowed. Wait, he said hesitantly. Isn't that the building where Aunt Rachel's company... James Matthew interrupted quickly, his tone sharp. Your aunt doesn't have a company. She does coding for someone else. You're mixing things up. The table laughed softly, the kind of laughter that carries pity and dismissal. I smiled back at James. He's right. I just work with computers, nothing important. But I felt his eyes on me a moment longer, lingering with suspicion, as if some instinct told him there was more to the story. The others continued, oblivious. Matthew and Daniel traded strategies about negotiating with developers, securing loans, leveraging Dad's connections. Their words rose and fell like waves, full of confidence but empty of substance. They did not know the project was already secured. They did not know the signatures were already mine. I reached for my glass again, letting the wine steady me. The irony was almost poetic. They dreamed of owning Harborview, and yet every brick, every pane of glass already belonged to me. But I kept my silence. 'Cause timing, I had learned, is everything. Have you ever sat in a room where people bragged about conquering something that was already yours? Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to bite your tongue while someone dismissed your achievements. And if you want to see how secrets like this can explode at exactly the right moment, subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next. So, Daniel raised his glass, still grinning. Here's to Harborview, the start of a new chapter. The crystal chimed around the table, a chorus of confidence. I raised mine slowly, the faintest smile playing at my lips. to Harborview, I said softly, and in that moment, I knew. Their empire of assumptions was built on sand, and the tide was coming in. The room buzzed with self-satisfaction. My brothers leaned into their wives, painting futures built on towers of glass and profit they did not yet own. My father looked proud, as though he had just passed down a crown to his worthy heirs. I stayed silent, tasting each bite, as if the food could ground me in the storm of arrogance circling around the table. And then the sound that cracked it all open came from a place no one expected, the glow of a phone screen in my nephew's hands. James, only 19, sat hunched over, scrolling absent-mindedly, like every teenager does during family dinners. But suddenly he froze. His fork slipped from his hand, clattering against the china. His face drained of color as he stared at the screen, eyes wide, flicking between me and the article in front of him. Aunt Rachel, his voice trembled. Did you know Forbes just updated the billionaire list? Nobody paid him any attention. Caroline continued slicing lamb, Laura poured more wine, Matthew was still talking about Harborview, and my father nodded approvingly. James cleared his throat again, louder this time. No, I mean it. There's someone here. Someone named Rachel Carter. She's listed at number 47. His voice cracked on the number, disbelief pulling every syllable apart. Her net worth is $3.8 billion. The air shattered. The chatter fell away. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the fireplace seemed to stop crackling, its warmth replaced by the sudden chill wrapping around the room. Daniel laughed, first too loud, too nervous. That's impossible. There must be dozens of Rachel Carters, a common name. It's not our Rachel. But James wasn't finished. His hand shook as he turned the screen toward the table. It says she's the founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics, the company that just acquired MedTech Industries. She's 32, from this city, and... He swallowed hard. She looks exactly like Aunt Rachel. All eyes turned to me. My father's face drained of color. My mother's pearls slipped against her neck as she clutched them tighter. My brothers leaned forward, hands trembling as if reaching for proof. Their wives stared, mouths open, searching for words. I calmly set down my fork, wiped my mouth with the linen napkin, and looked at James. Is that so? Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. My father whispered, barely audible. That's impossible. Matthew snatched the phone from James, his hand trembling. His wife leaned over his shoulder, gasping. Daniel grabbed at the screen, scrolling frantically. Every article, every photograph, every headline repeated the same truth, my face, my name, my company. The room spun in disbelief. I leaned back, my voice soft but steady. You never asked. You never wondered what I was building. You assumed I was struggling. You assumed because I drove an old car, because I liked my small apartment, that I was less. My mother's lip quivered. Rachel, is this some kind of joke? I held her gaze. No, it's simply who I am, who I've been all along. And here let me turn to you who are listening now. What would you do if the people who dismissed you suddenly saw you for who you really are? Would you reveal everything, or would you stay silent and let them choke on their assumptions? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your truth. The room had been theirs just minutes ago, filled with laughter, toasts, and plans for empires. But in a single heartbeat, that power shifted. Not because I demanded it, not because I raised my voice, but because the truth has a way of standing on its own. And that truth was written on every screen, staring back at them with undeniable clarity. I picked up my wine glass again, calm, measured. Now I said quietly, "Shall we continue dinner?" But deep down, I knew nothing at this table would ever be the same again. The silence was crushing. It pressed against the walls, against our lungs, as if even the house itself refused to breathe. My father, the man who had spent his entire life commanding rooms with his voice, sat frozen. His lips parted, but empty of words. My mother clutched her pearls so tightly I feared the string might snap. Matthew's face went pale as he scrolled through the article on James's phone. His wife leaned in, her jaw dropping with each photo. "It's her," she whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. Daniel snatched the phone, scanning frantically. His hand trembled as he read line after line. Quantum dynamics, artificial intelligence, healthcare revolution, pharmaceutical acquisitions. His voice cracked disbelief dripping from every syllable. Rachel Carter, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in history. Their eyes turned back to me, searching for denial, for some escape from the impossible truth. But I simply sat there cutting another piece of turkey, my movements deliberate, unhurried. My father finally found his voice, though it was barely more than a whisper. This cannot be real. Rachel, you work for someone else. You've never... I looked up calmly. You never asked. The words landed like thunder, shaking every illusion they had built. My mother's eyes glistened, her voice trembling. But you live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old Honda. How could this be? Because I like my apartment, I interrupted softly. It's where I built the company, and the Honda runs just fine. Daniel shook his head violently, refusing to believe. No, this doesn't make sense. You let us think you were struggling. You let us pity you. I never said I was struggling, I replied evenly. You assumed. You wanted to believe I was the weak one. It made you feel stronger. Matthew's voice was hoarse as he read from the screen. She donated $50 million to children's hospitals. She's building a cancer research center. His eyes flicked up, his voice breaking. Is this true? Yes, I said, setting down my fork. The Morrison Center will open in the spring. The weight of truth crashed over the table. Every fork was still, every glass untouched. The food turned cold as the family stared not at me, but at the stranger they realized they had never known. And in that silence I saw it all, the fear in my father's eyes, the shame in my mother's, the envy burning in my brother's. Years of dismissal, of quiet condescension were now crumbling beneath the weight of reality. Let me pause and ask you, have you ever hidden your true strength only to watch the world stumble when they finally see it? Did it feel like victory or vindication? Share that moment below. I want to know if you've lived through this same shift. My father reached for his phone with shaking hands. He typed my name, searching for some loophole, some flaw. When he found the headlines, Forbes, Fortune, Wall Street Journal, his eyes widened. Each article was another nail in the coffin of his denial. This is impossible, he whispered again. It's simply the truth, I answered. The fireplace popped loudly, a spark shooting upward, startling my mother into a gasp. It was as if the house itself punctuated my words. And then came the final collapse. Daniel's voice broke, barely audible. If this is true, if you're really worth billions, then what does that make us? I looked at him steadily. That makes you exactly who you've always been. My brothers, my family, nothing more, nothing less. The room shuddered beneath the weight of truth. The empire of arrogance had cracked. And though they tried to gather the pieces, they could no longer deny that the quiet sister they had dismissed all their lives was the one who had already surpassed them all. All eyes pinned me to my chair, as though the simple act of breathing might unravel the fragile web of denial they were still clinging to. My brother's knuckles whitened around James's phone, their wives leaning so far across the table they nearly tipped their glasses. My father's mouth opened, then closed again, words failing him for the first time in years. I placed my napkin neatly on the table, my calm, deliberate, my voice steady. 8 years ago, I was sitting alone in my apartment downtown. It was barely large enough to fit a bed, a desk, and the old laptop I had saved from college. That's where I started quantum dynamics. The name hung in the air like a foreign language, but I saw recognition flicker across their faces. They had read it in those articles, whispered at board meetings, flashed on business headlines. I had maybe $3,000 in savings, I continued, and no investors. I worked part-time jobs, poured coffee-coated websites for small businesses just to pay rent. Nights, weekends, every spare hour went into building algorithms I believed could change the way healthcare diagnoses worked. My mother blinked rapidly, tears glistening. Rachel, why didn't you tell us? I smiled faintly. Would you have listened, or would you have told me to stop wasting time on computers and get a real job? The silence confirmed the answer. Matthew's voice cracked as he scrolled again. It says here you built diagnostic systems used in hospitals across the country, that you revolutionized artificial intelligence in medicine, that you've saved lives. That's right, I said simply. Daniel's hand trembled as he passed the phone back. And Acquisitions, pharmaceutical companies, European mergers. I nodded. Completed last night. My assistant has been trying to reach me, but I didn't want to interrupt dinner. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had silenced me for years, and now I was the one choosing silence, even while billions moved at my command. My father leaned forward, his authority fractured, his voice unsteady. Why keep this from us? Why hide? I met his gaze. Because I wanted one place where I wasn't a CEO or a billionaire or a headline. I wanted to be your daughter, your sister, just Rachel. But you didn't love that version either. You loved the idea of me, the one who needed your guidance, your approval, the family disappointment who made you feel superior. My words hit harder than I expected. My mother covered her mouth, sobbing. My brothers shifted uncomfortably, shame settling over them like heavy chains. James spoke softly, almost reverently. Aunt Rachel, you did all of this from that tiny apartment with nothing but a laptop. I smiled at him, the first genuine smile of the evening. Yes, and I'd do it all over again. And to those of you listening now, have you ever felt underestimated because your dream didn't look like success to anyone else? Did you keep building in silence until the results spoke for you? Tell me in the comments. And if you want to hear the rest of this story, the twists, the fallout, and the choice I made that night, make sure you subscribe. Because this is just the beginning. The room sat heavy with silence, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Plates of food grew cold, wine glasses stood untouched. My family, who once believed themselves to be the sole keepers of legacy and success, were staring at a reality too big to deny. And for the first time, I wasn't shrinking under their gaze. I was towering above it. Not because of the billions, not because of the headlines, but because they were finally seeing me for who I had always been. The quiet one at the table, the one they had dismissed, the one who built an empire they never even noticed. The silence was unbearable. My father rubbed his temple with the back of his hand as though pressing hard enough might erase what he had just heard. My mother's sobs broke the air in uneven gasps. Matthew sat stiff, his tie loosened, staring at the table as if numbers might save him. Daniel scrolled through more articles, desperate for some line that could prove this was all a mistake. But no article denied it. Every headline confirmed the truth. I was not the failure they had imagined. I was the force they had ignored. And still I had not told them everything. I leaned forward, folding my hands in front of me. There's one more thing you should know. Their heads lifted in unison, dread etching their faces. My father's voice cracked. More? Yes, I said calmly. 6 months ago, Thomson Industries was on the verge of collapse. Cash flow problems. Expansion projects stalled. Banks circling. You were out of options. He froze, eyes narrowing. How do you know that? Because I said softly, the capital that saved you, the investor who stepped in, the silent partner who wrote the checks. That was me. The room imploded. Matthew shot up from his chair, face flushed. No, that's impossible. I was the investor. I interrupted, my tone calm but unyielding. Technically, my firm executed the deal, but it was my money, my terms, my signature. Daniel's hands trembled as he scrolled frantically. His voice cracked as he read aloud. Quantum Dynamics acquires Thomson Industries. Acquisition complete 6 months ago. He dropped the phone onto the table as though it burned him. My mother's hands flew to her mouth. You bought us. Not you, I corrected. Your businesses. I kept my distance. Silent investor. That's the role I preferred. My father's face had turned ashen. For decades, he had held authority at this table by virtue of his empire. And now in one sentence, that authority crumbled. You've been my partner, he whispered, his voice hollow. I've been your safety net, I replied. The room was heavy with disbelief. My brothers sat stunned, their ambitions of inheritance collapsing under the weight of this new reality. I looked around the table at the people who had dismissed me, pitied me, reduced me to nothing more than the daughter with the little computer job. And now they realized their empire existed only because I had chosen to save it. And let me stop here for a moment. What would you do if you discovered the person your family dismissed was the one holding their future in her hands? Would you admit you were wrong, or would you cling tighter to pride? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And stay with me, because the biggest twist of all was still to come. You won't want to miss it. My father reached for his glass, his hand trembling so badly the wine sloshed against the rim. He stared into it as though the answers might surface from its depths. Rachel, he said finally, his voice broken, I don't know what to say. I leaned back in my chair. You don't have to say anything. You made decisions with the information you had. I never corrected you. That's on me. But my calm only deepened their shame. Matthew whispered almost to himself all this time. We thought you were nothing, and you owned everything. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth sat between us, undeniable, unstoppable. And as the fire cracked behind us, I knew the dinner was far from over. The real reckoning hadn't even begun. My father's hand shook so violently that the wineglass tipped crimson, spilling across the pristine white tablecloth like a wound. My mother gasped, scrambling with napkins, but her eyes never left me. Her pearls rattled against each other as her fingers fumbled. She looked as if she no longer recognized her own daughter. Matthew sank back into his chair, his chest heaving. This can't be true, he muttered, shaking his head over and over. We just told you. You don't deserve anything. We said you couldn't handle responsibility. We explained why you were unfit. His voice cracked. And all this time, you were already running empires bigger than all of us combined. Daniel's face burned, red shame and fury colliding. He jabbed a finger at me, his words spilling out in a torrent. You hid this. You made us believe you were weak. You sat there and let us look down on you, let us think you needed us. You... His voice broke mid-sentence, the accusation collapsing under its own weight. I kept my tone steady. I didn't hide who I am. I hid what I do. There's a difference. Who I am hasn't changed. I'm the same person who tutored you through your business courses, Daniel. The same person who taught you basic coding, Matthew, when you thought you might switch careers. The same sister who babysat your children so you could have nights out. The difference is that you never asked about my life. You only assumed. The room swelled with an unbearable silence. Even the nephews, James and Tommy, looked at their fathers with something that resembled disappointment. For the first time, the generational chain of authority seemed fractured. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Rachel. The inheritance discussion was perfectly reasonable. We believed Matthew and Daniel were better suited to carry the legacy. We thought... His words trailed off into the space between shame and regret. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his, and I agreed. You're right. I don't know how to run a construction company. I don't know how to manage a chain of restaurants. That was never my skill set. But what I do know how to do is build something from nothing. And you never thought to ask about that. My mother's tears finally spilled, streaming down her cheeks. She whispered, almost pleading, We didn't know, Rachel. We had no idea. I let the silence answer her, because what could I say they hadn't wanted to know? Let me ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment when the people you loved the most finally realized how badly they underestimated you? Did you feel vindicated, or did it just hurt? Share your story in the comments. I want to know how you lived through that moment. The table was no longer a place of celebration. The food lay untouched, the decorations suddenly garish under the weight of truth. The carefully planned evening had collapsed into chaos, not with shouting, but with the quiet devastation of recognition. Daniel rubbed his forehead, his voice hollow. So what happens now? Do you control us? Do you own us? I met his eyes. I don't want to own you. I never did. I wanted to be your sister. But when you dismissed me, when you laughed at me, when you treated me as though my life meant less, that's when you lost the right to define me. Matthew looked sick, his hand covering his mouth. His wife reached for him, but he pulled away, staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. My father's voice trembled, fragile where it had once been iron. Rachel, how do we fix this? How do we undo what's been said? I set my fork down with precision, my voice calm. You can't undo it. But you can choose what you do next. You can continue pretending I'm the daughter who needed your pity. Or you can decide to know me as I really am. The fire cracked sharply behind us, the only applause for the truth laid bare. And though none of them admitted it, I could see it in their eyes, the fear, the shame, and the dawning realization that their family hierarchy had just been rewritten. I folded my hands on the table, the linen napkin still damp with wine at my side. Everyone's eyes were fixed on me, as though I were some apparition conjured out of thin air. For years they had looked right through me, and now they were finally seeing me, but only because a headline had forced them to. "I need you all to understand something," I said, my voice calm, but carrying the weight of years unsaid. "I have not changed. I am the same person I have always been. I laughed with you at birthdays. I held your children when they cried. I showed up for every holiday dinner even when I knew what was waiting for me at this table. I never left. I never abandoned you. I was here." My mother sobbed into her hands, her shoulders shaking. My father leaned back heavily in his chair, his authority stripped away, his eyes glassy, with something I could not yet name, shame, maybe regret. "I hid what I do," I continued, "because I wanted to have one place in this world where I wasn't a CEO or a billionaire or a name on a list. I wanted to be your daughter, your sister, your aunt, just Rachel. But even that wasn't enough, was it? Because you didn't love me. You loved the idea of me. The version that needed you. The version you could feel superior to." Daniel shook his head violently, his denial crumbling as he spoke. "That's not fair. We did love you. We didn't know. You didn't want to know." I cut in sharper, now my voice cracking under the strain of years. "You liked believing I was struggling. You liked thinking I needed your guidance. It made you feel strong. It made you feel better about yourselves." Matthew lowered his gaze, his cheeks flushed. His wife pressed a hand against his arm, but he pulled away, unable to meet my eyes. I turned toward my mother. "You worried about me, didn't you? Worried about how I would survive in that tiny apartment? Worried about how long I could drive that Honda before it gave out? And all that time you never once thought to ask how I was really doing? You never asked if I was happy. You only asked if I was secure enough for you to stop worrying." Her tears flowed harder, her voice breaking. "We didn't mean to hurt you, Rachel. We thought—" "You thought wrong," I said softly. The weight of those words hung over the table like a storm cloud, and for the first time in my life, none of them had anything to say. Let me turn to you who are watching this right now. Have you ever felt that the people closest to you only loved the weaker version of you, that they needed you to be small so they could feel big? How did you deal with that truth when it surfaced? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear how you faced it. So, the fire snapped behind me, punctuating the silence. I sat straighter, the heaviness in my chest easing now that the words were finally free. "You talk about legacy," I said at last, sweeping my eyes across the table. "But legacy isn't about who inherits buildings or businesses. Legacy is about how you treat the people you call family. And for years you treated me as less. Not because I was less, but because you wanted me to be." My father's hands trembled as he tried to lift his glass again, but he set it back down untouched. "Rachel," he whispered, "I owe you an apology for everything, for dismissing you, for assuming, for failing to see you." I held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You don't owe me an apology. What you owe me is honesty. Decide who you want me to be in this family, the daughter you pity or the daughter you actually know. That's your choice." The room was still, heavy, changed. And for the first time, I wasn't the one struggling to breathe. The room had gone still, every adult at the table, drowning in shame or shock. And then, like sunlight breaking through a storm, a new voice rose, tentative but steady. James, my 19-year-old nephew, cleared his throat. His phone still glowed faintly in his hands, the headlines of my life reflecting in his wide eyes. "Aunt Rachel," he said quietly, "these articles. They say you created diagnostic systems that are being used in hospitals. I'm studying computer science, and honestly, what you built is revolutionary." Every head turned toward him. His father, Matthew, stiffened as if wanting to stop him, but James didn't flinch. His voice grew stronger. "Can you tell me how it works, I mean? What it's like to build something that actually saves lives?" For a moment I was taken aback. I had expected anger, denial, more accusations. But here was genuine curiosity, genuine admiration. I let a smile spread across my face, the first true smile of the evening. It started with frustration. Medical diagnostics were too slow, too inaccurate. I believed algorithms could recognize patterns that humans might miss. We built systems that scanned millions of data points in seconds, bloodwork imaging patient history. And now hospitals across the country use them to catch illnesses earlier, saving lives every single day. Tommy, his younger cousin, leaned in his face full of awe. There's another article here. It says you donated $50 million to children's hospitals, that you're building a cancer research center. Is that true? Yes, I said. The Morrison Center. It'll open next spring. State-of-the-art labs, new treatment protocols. It's not just about money, it's about giving doctors tools they never had before. Their voices overlapped, now excited questions tumbling over one another. How did you even start? What was the hardest part? Do you think AI can cure cancer? I answered each one, my heart warming in a way I hadn't expected. For the first time in years, someone in my family was listening, really listening, not to criticize, not to diminish, but to understand. Matthew looked stricken, as though he couldn't reconcile the son he had raised with the admiration spilling across his face. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his own children hanging on my every word. My parents sat in silence, their tears drying into lines of regret. And yet I felt something shift. This was the first time I wasn't the disappointment. I was the inspiration. And let me pause here. Can you imagine what it feels like when the younger generation sees you not as a burden, but as proof that dreams are possible? Have you ever had someone finally look at you with admiration after years of dismissal? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear how that moment felt for you. As the questions continued, I could sense the tension loosening, but only just. Because admiration from the children didn't erase the arrogance of the parents. My brothers still sat stiff, their pride bruised their eyes, darting between their sons and me. My father tapped his fingers against the table, restless, as though searching for a way to reclaim control. And I knew this dinner was far from over. The biggest revelation had yet to come. Because the truth wasn't only about what I had built outside these walls. It was also about what I had done inside them, without their knowledge, without their permission. That secret was still waiting in the shadows. And when it emerged, it would strike harder than everything they had heard so far. The voices of my nephews still lingered in the air, full of awe and curiosity, but when they finally fell silent, the weight of the room returned. My brothers avoided my eyes. My mother's hands twisted the napkin in her lap until it nearly tore. My father's jaw worked wordlessly like he was chewing on stones. I exhaled slowly and leaned forward, my fingers brushing the rim of my wine glass. We're at a crossroads, I said. My voice was calm, but every syllable carried the gravity of years. Tonight could be the end of us, or the beginning of something entirely new. Their eyes snapped to me, startled by the shift. For years I continued, I let you believe I was small. That I was the daughter who needed guidance, the sister who needed protection. You built a story about me, and I allowed it to live because it gave me peace. It gave me one place where I wasn't a CEO or a headline or a billionaire. But here's the truth. None of that was ever real. And now you've seen who I am. My father's throat bobbed as he swallowed. Rachel, what are you saying? I'm saying we start over, I replied. No more illusions. No more versions of me that you created to soothe your pride. You can choose to know me, the real me, or you can cling to the version you liked better. The daughter who seemed weaker, the sister you could dismiss. The words cracked through the air like lightning. My mother's tears welled again. We don't want to lose you, Rachel. You already did, I answered softly. You lost me the moment you decided I wasn't worthy of being more than a footnote in this family's legacy. But I'm giving you another chance. I'm saying we start again with honesty. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned in, his face pale. But how do we do that? After tonight, after everything we said, how do we even begin? By telling the truth, I said simply. By admitting that you never knew me. And by deciding if you actually want to. Matthew's voice broke. Rachel, I don't know if we deserve that chance. Maybe you don't, I replied, but this isn't about what you deserve. It's about what you choose now. And let me bring you in here. Have you ever reached a moment when you gave people one final chance to see you for who you truly are? Did they take it, or did they walk away? Share your answer below, because this is the point where everything either heals or breaks forever. The fire popped behind us, echoing like a gavel. My father lowered his head, his hands covering his face. My mother whispered prayers under her breath. My brothers stared at me, lost in the ruins of their pride. But James and Tommy leaned closer, their voices quiet but steady. We want to know you, Aunt Rachel, the real you. Their words were small, but they were enough, a thread of hope in the suffocating air. I smiled faintly, my chest tightening. Then maybe this family has a chance. But deep inside, I knew the most devastating truth had yet to be revealed. One final secret still lingered, one last twist that would either shatter what was left or rebuild us stronger than before. That moment was coming, and nothing would prepare them for it. The room felt fragile, as though one wrong word could splinter it forever. My father, who once commanded every table with his booming voice, now sat hunched like an old man, his eyes fixed on the stain of spilled wine. My mother dabbed her cheeks with the corner of a napkin, her hands trembling. My brothers shifted restlessly, pride and shame wrestling inside them. And then my father spoke, his voice stripped of its usual iron. Rachel, I owe you an apology. The words were uneven, raw, almost painful for him to say. For all the years I dismissed your work, for telling myself that you didn't belong in the world of business, for assuming you were less. I see now how blind I've been. His eyes met mine, wet, weary, desperate. I am sorry, Rachel. For a moment, the weight of decades pressed against my chest. I had waited so long to hear those words, and now that they were here, they were both everything and not enough. My mother's voice cracked as she added, We only wanted to protect you. But we didn't protect you at all, did we? We hurt you, and I cannot forgive myself for that. She reached across the table with trembling fingers, but stopped short as if afraid I would recoil. I laid my hand gently on hers. Mom, I didn't need protection. I needed respect. She broke down again, sobbing into her napkin. Matthew cleared his throat, shame pulling his shoulders forward. Rachel, I said things tonight I can't take back. I thought I was being the responsible one, the heir apparent. But compared to you, I look like a child playing with blocks. I don't know how to live with that. I turned toward him. You don't need to compete with me. You just need to be honest about who I am and who you are. Daniel exhaled shakily, his usual arrogance gone. You could buy and sell Dad's companies 100 times over, yet you let us believe we were the ones carrying the family. Why give us that illusion? Because I didn't need your empire, I answered. You did. And I wanted you to value it without measuring it against me. The words sank deep, hitting harder than any accusation could. The fire behind me roared, suddenly flames leaping high, as though the house itself demanded attention. And in that moment, I realized something had shifted. They weren't just listening, they were finally hearing me. All right, let me pause right here, because this is where it matters most. If you were in my place with the power to either walk away forever or give your family a chance to rebuild, what would you do? Would you forgive them, or would you leave? Tell me in the comments, and if you want to know how I made my choice, subscribe so you can follow the rest of this story. But when the silence settled again, I drew a deep breath. Here's the truth. I don't need your inheritance. I don't need your approval. What I need is honesty. If you want to know me, the real me, then tonight is where we start. But if you prefer the version of me you created, then we part ways here. My father's eyes filled with tears. No, we start tonight. We listen. We learn. For the first time in years, I believed him. The table no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a place where something new could be born. Not the shallow bond of appearances, but the raw, uncomfortable truth of family. And as I lifted my glass once more, I knew whatever happened next, this was no longer their story to define. It was mine. I looked around the table one last time. The once proud faces of my family were transformed, no longer hardened masks of arrogance, but softened with tears, shame, and something else I had thought impossible, respect. My father's shoulders sagged, no longer squared like a king guarding his throne. My mother's eyes were swollen from crying, but for the first time she wasn't looking at me with pity, she was looking at me with awe. My brothers, who had mocked my little computer job, now sat humbled, words stripped from their tongues. I set down my glass, folding my hands together. "You don't need to give me anything," I said softly. "The businesses should go to Matthew and Daniel. They understand them. They've worked in them. That's exactly how it should be." Daniel frowned, confused. "But Rachel, you could buy Dad's companies 100 times over." "Exactly," I answered, "which is why I don't need them. You do. The inheritance should go to the people who will value it most. And for me, my wealth isn't the billions listed in Forbes. My wealth is sitting here in this room if you choose to see me as I am." The words hung heavy, then light, then freeing. My father's voice broke. "Rachel, after everything we said tonight, you can still say that." I smiled gently, especially after tonight, because now we can finally be honest. And honesty is worth more than any empire. The fire popped behind me. James leaned forward, his eyes bright. "Aunt Rachel, would you tell us more about how you built it all, about the mistakes, the breakthroughs?" Tommy chimed in, his voice trembling with excitement. "And about the Cancer Research Center I'm pre-med. I want to know how you're changing things." I felt warmth spread through me, a weight lifting. For the first time, I wasn't invisible at this table. For the first time, I was being heard. I nodded. "Yes, I'll tell you everything. But first, let's finish this meal together, like a family should." We exchanged gifts that night, not just the ones wrapped in paper and bows, but gifts of truth, of apologies, of beginnings. The conversation stretched long past midnight questions, laughter, tears, and the first fragile steps toward something we had never shared before, a relationship built on reality, not assumptions. When I finally left, driving my old Honda back to my modest downtown apartment, I smiled to myself. Tomorrow the world would demand my attention again, mergers, acquisitions, projects that would change lives. But tonight I had something more valuable. Tonight I had a family willing to start over, and that was worth more than any Forbes ranking could ever measure. So, now let me turn this moment to you. If you had the chance to rebuild a broken relationship with honesty, with truth, would you take it? Or would you walk away? Tell me below. And if you want to hear another story where hidden truths explode in ways no one expects, click through to the next video. What happens there will make this look almost simple. What? I pulled into my parking spot, the city lights glittering overhead. For years I had carried the weight of silence, of being misunderstood. Tonight I had set it down. And for the first time I allowed myself to believe maybe being truly seen was the greatest inheritance of all. When I finally stepped out of the car that night, the cool winter air wrapped around me like a blanket. The city hummed quietly in the distance, the same city where I had fought for every dream, every risk, every sleepless night that built the life I now lived. My apartment lights glowed softly from the window above, humble and familiar. Nothing about it screamed wealth, and that was exactly how I wanted it. Inside, I kicked off my shoes, set my keys on the counter, and poured myself a glass of water. The silence here was different from the silence at the dinner table. This silence was peace. It carried no judgment, no pity, no comparisons. Just me, my space, and the knowledge of who I truly was. I thought back to the dinner, the shock on their faces, the shame in their eyes, the tears in my mother's voice. And then I remembered the spark in my nephews, the genuine curiosity, the respect. For the first time, I felt like maybe the cycle of dismissal had broken. Maybe in them a new story could begin. What mattered most wasn't the billions, the headlines, or the recognition. It was the moment when the truth was finally spoken. The moment when I stopped hiding, and in that choice I found freedom. Tomorrow the world would call again, meetings, negotiations, global projects that demanded my attention. But tonight, I wasn't the CEO of a billion-dollar company. I wasn't number 47 on a list. Tonight I was simply Rachel, a daughter, a sister, an aunt, a woman who had finally been seen for who she was not, who others wanted her to be. And that, I realized, was the kind of wealth no number could ever measure.